Nice. Thank you, everybody, for coming. What a great crowd of people here. This is another one of our Gen AI breakfasts that Merantix is organizing for over a year now. Usually, always with a quite topical focus in an industry where we look into investing. Today, with the topic is building with LLMs, and I think we have a great panel with great panelists here. On the one side, Bo Tranberg, CTO Co-founder of Libra, Lennard Schmidt, founder of Langdock, and Gabriela Hernández Larios from Google. Today, Google is kind of joining us in organizing the session, maybe a quick overview of what we want to cover today. Happy to give you generally a quick overview of Merantix, tell you a bit why we do those sessions. Then would like to hand over to all the panelists to introduce kind of what they're working on, and then would love to dive deeper into really the tech stack of LLM startups, how to work with LLMs, what considerations to make now to set up for kind of growth, for scalability. Some focus on the startup side, but maybe also some on kind of on the enterprise focus from the Google perspective. But then also would love to take the glass ball and look into the future, what kind of LLM development holds. And what we can expect there. But yeah, maybe very brief about Merantix. So Merantix is started in 2016 as an AI venture studio, so focused on really building AI companies, partnering with entrepreneurs pre-idea, and then trying to really leverage the ecosystem and bring ideas to life. We've done so now 11 times across different industries, quite sector agnostic, usually within industries where we believe it makes sense, building out of Germany, building out of Europe, where we can really leverage our talent and industry access. There is quite some more unique initiatives that Merantix started to really build an AI ecosystem that back in 2016 wasn't really much there in Berlin. So the whole kind of AI campus here that you see is operated by Merantix to bring really quite broadly stakeholders together, from startups to researchers to policymakers to investors. Then we've also created a dedicated AI consultancy, Merantix Momentum, that does project work with the government, with corporates, and really gives us a bit of an industry access, and have also done a bit of work on the policy side, but all really to build a platform on which we try to help startups to grow in the early stages, bring people together. And also in that kind of vein, we're organizing the session today, where I hope you also connect amongst each other before and after the session here. And right now, Merantix, given that we I think have quite some touch points with different people in the venture environment, we raised a new fund, a 100 million fund, with which we will also invest in a VC like fashion in early stage companies, from pre-seed to Series A, 500K to 2.5 million tickets. That maybe as a quite brief overview of what we do here. And now want to dive into the panel discussion, and maybe every one of you can briefly quickly introduce yourself, tell us what you're working on, and how LLMs play a role in that. Yeah.
Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Bo, and before I tell you what we do, I need to see how many of you are lawyers. Okay, so great. The only lawyers here are part of my team. So then I can safely tell you what we're doing. So in Libra, we're building an AI-powered law firm. And so when we talk to lawyers, that's not what we tell them. So we're starting simpler than that. So we're building, they think we're building productivity tools for lawyers, which is where we're starting. So we are using AI, using LLMs to identify workflows that lawyers do that can be automated. And we want to vertically integrate. So it's not just this chat interface where you can ask questions about a contract or, is this compliant, or can you please summarize it? But it's extracting data from contracts, analyzing legal arguments and responses from counterparties, and drafting response letters as well. So those things that lawyers do, and then you have several iterations back and forth when you have some dispute that you're solving. So eventually we'll become the AI-powered law firm taking over the entire process of solving a claim. But we have to start a bit simpler than that, and identify some specific workflows that we can solve really well and vertically integrate, and then expand from there. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Yes. Hi, I'm Lennard, co-founder of Langdock. What we do is essentially like a model agnostic ChatGPT. So last summer we talked to a bunch of Berlin CTOs, and we talked about different topics like agents and what you have. But the one thing that they all came back with was, look, our people use ChatGPT. We want them to be able to use it, but it's not compliant. So we need some kind of platform where we can essentially manage the kind of data compliant usage of LLMs. So what we've built is, if you look at ChatGPT, and by the way, who's using ChatGPT like in their daily work? That's nice. So if you look at ChatGPT, it's like the application where conversations are, the conversation history, where you can upload documents and so on. And this is connected to large language models, like the models of OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral, and so on. And we've essentially rebuilt the whole application layer and make that self-hostable, but also hosted in our cloud, and enable companies to essentially connect any large language model or like their API to that interface. And like the problem we're solving with that is like one, compliance. You can essentially use models that are hosted in Europe. For example, OpenAI is offering through Azure, or Anthropic's offering through AWS, or Mistral's offering. And the second part is that like lots of large companies, like our largest customer is Merck, which is like one of the DAX companies. They have like more than 60,000 employees. They don't want to lock in on one vendor now. They don't really know like where the soul is going. Like, and we talk about this today, but like nobody knows where LMs are going and what future models and model providers will be out there. And they essentially want to be able to give their employees something like ChatGPT without locking themselves down to one specific model provider without any compliance hassles. And that's what we do.
Thank you. Hey everyone, this is Gabriela. Work at Google, but I have to say with Google, we don't work only with Gemini, right? We work also with open weight models and open source models. So how I work, my work is very versatile. So I work with a lot of customers, with their technical people on building applications based on generative AI, but I also work with our engineers and with our researchers to understand how to make better the models, how to make better the infrastructure. But I also hold conversations with C-level to understand the vision and so on. So currently I have two passions. One passion is how to bring generative AI to production. So I do agree a lot with you in the sense that for me, an application goes beyond an LLM. So at the end of the day, if you want to bring something in production, the least of your problems is going to be the LLM. It's the entire system with bulk compares different things. And I think we are going to discuss this eventually during the panel session. And my second passion right now, what I really feel very, interested in is parameter efficient fine-tuning methods on distillation and quantization. I personally think like PEFT, like LoRa, is underrated and underexplored for different application use cases because we know only the theory and the papers, but the practical implications and the practical tips and tricks behind it that can be close to fully fine-tuning a model, nobody has really explored. So I'm really working a lot on that on my free time. To understand the extent of this. Yeah, basically that's about me.
Great, thank you. Also, I think we have reserved, I think, like 30 minutes for the panel and then some open questions afterwards. But if you have some very topical questions on what's being discussed right now, feel free to raise your hand and ask as well. Maybe one also question: how many founders or people building startups with LLMs are here today? Maybe raise your hand quickly. All right, good amount, great. Then the next question, which is probably the first question, the first thing every technical person thinks about when building a product based on LLMs. I would love to dive deeper into your tech stack. What does it look like? Do you use open source, call an API, on-prem, in the cloud, rack, or fine-tune? And maybe also give us a bit your thought process and why you chose a particular way, and when you give us some highlights about your tech stack.
Okay, I can go first, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we don't, like, what we do is we provide an interface for LLMs to work for employees and for people to kind of work with them. So we don't really do much on the LLM side itself. We kind of work with LLMs. So what we do is RAG, like we do lots of RAG. We essentially have integrations to Notion, Confluence, SharePoint, OneDrive, and so on. So that's something that we build out. And the reason we essentially only do RAG and we don't do any fine tuning is that we haven't seen a specific case yet for us where this makes sense. And our whole kind of premise to companies is, look, there's like a lot of fuzziness around AI. You want to kind of get this going within your company. You want to like your employees to be able to understand how LLMs work. And we give you like a secure environment for that, where you give you all the choices you can make. So essentially companies can bring their own API keys or bring their own models. But what we see is that most companies choose to use OpenAI's models through Azure in Europe. So like I think the most majority of our usage is with GPT 3.5 and 4 hosted by Azure in Europe. And this is, I think, and this will, I think, still be relevant in the next few months. Like the only shift that we are seeing that some people choose Claude 3 Opus just because it's better, but like it's not yet compliant in Europe. Like they haven't released it here. They only released Haiku and Somnet. And we're very interested to see like how Llama is going. But on essentially taking models or taking like open source models and fine tuning them over time is something where we see more like an optimization on like an existing kind of base usage. And what we see right now is that people are still like very much in like trying to figure out how to extract value from LLMs. And it's way less effort to use just generic models for that. But I think that's also because we are essentially just enabling companies to use LLMs, whereas you guys are more toward like in a vertical space where you need fine tuning.
Maybe also quickly talk about what RAG is, what it means. Okay. For some of the people that might not know.
So RAG is like retrieval augmented generation. So if you think about an LLM, like if you use ChatGPT, you input like a question, like, oh, write me a poem about Paris, and the LLM will go and do that. In the end, all ChatGPT is doing, it takes the prompt, it does some kind of enrichment of that prompt, like adding more information about maybe the user or about context that's relevant, and then it sends that information to an LLM. And LLMs, once they're trained, they only do inference. So essentially you send input to an LLM and you get output out. And retrieval augmented generation essentially means that you take, that you understand the kind of query of a user, and then you enrich that prompt with more information that might be helpful. So think like web search might be one. Like for example, you ask, who's Angela Merkel? And you could either just send that prompt directly to an LLM, and the LLM will essentially generate a response just based on like the kind of intrinsic or inherent knowledge of the model itself. The other thing you can do with RAG, retrieval augmented generation, is that you do that, but on top of that, you also do a Google query with the question, who's Angela Merkel, or like Angela Merkel history, Angela Merkel summary, and you essentially take the content of like the top listed websites and you provide that as additional context to the LLM, to reply with a better answer, like a more nuanced answer, like a more accurate answer, an answer that has access to real-time information. And then you essentially send the answer back. So that's kind of RAG in a nutshell. And there's like lots of things around that, but it's been super helpful of kind of turning LLMs from kind of pure knowledge engines that have some kind of grab of reality into engines that kind of can work with real-time information, with context from personalized files and so on.
Great. So we're doing the exact opposite of Langdock, and I'm not here to fight Lennard, not maybe later. So at Libra, currently we are only doing fine-tuning and no RAG, and that's because we are focusing on very narrow defined use cases and workflows. And for this purpose, taking an open model and fine-tuning that on even a small data set, a small proprietary data set can give you results that match the GPT-4 level much bigger models. So on the tech stack side, we decided to make life difficult for ourselves by working in the legal industry. So there are really strict requirements for data protection, especially related to the attorney-client principle. So lawyers are not allowed to use ChatGPT. They are not even allowed to use the Azure OpenAI service hosted in Europe with all their extra data protection clauses. So we have to use open models, host them on servers within the EU owned by or run by an EU-owned host. So that just gives us a lot more difficulties in building the product when we can't rely on open APIs. But on the other hand, that also allows us to build something that is very specific and tailored to these workflows for the lawyers we're working with, and build a product that can help them in a way that no other product can, because we are getting data from our customers, fine-tuning the models to their specific use cases, and then we can build these modules in our pipeline that will just make them much more effective at the job.
Great, thank you. And Gabriela, maybe as an add-on question, you mentioned quickly in the intro that you work with different models. How is it at Google? Do you like mainly work with Google models? Do you also look at other models? How do you kind of evaluate what is best for a specific use case? Because ultimately you try to build great applications that work in production as well.
Yeah, I mean, I will touch that question, but first I wanted to follow up on this one. I was very, so I think like maybe just on the stack, I want to like mention something about the stack. So we have Google AI Studio that is for developers, it's for free. You can tune wherever. And then you have Google Cloud with Merantix AI Studio, where it's like for enterprise and enterprise ready and all whatever that means. So what I want to say there is the focus on Merantix AI is to be both for proprietary Google models and for also open weight models. So you can find there Mistral, you can find Mixtral. When Llama 3 was announced by Meta a few days ago, in the same day it was announced on Merantix AI. So you can also get access to Llama 3, not only like as a deploy as it is, but also to tune it, like to tune, to distill, and to serve it on efficient things like the LLM. So I think we are trying to have a unified ecosystem for you to develop using the LLM that you want. The only LLM that we don't provide, and it's understandably, is OpenAI LLMs, but besides that, I think we have a stack there. And also we are focusing on the platform itself. So you can do tuning, you can do distillation for Gemini models. And then also like a platform to develop agents and all of that. But what I wanted to mention essentially is like, in terms of RAG and fine tuning, I want to make clear that it's not either or. You don't have to either use RAG or fine-tuning. There are different use cases for each thing. And in terms of RAG, retrieval augmented generation, we need to think that there are two steps. One part is the retrieval part, and the other part is the generation. The retrieval is when you work with embeddings, you have the query of the user, and you try to match across all your data store or your knowledge base, which are the things that match the best to answer that query. Then that's the retrieval part. Then you put this one on the prompt. You have a prompt template, you put this, and then based on the LLM, you generate a text. Now, what can be fine-tuned in a retrieval augmented generation are two things. One thing is the embeddings. So if you have embedding model and you don't know, like, you are trying to evaluate and so on, and it's not giving the performance because you have a different vocabulary or different things, then you can tune the embeddings. In Google, we also have our embeddings models, and you can tune the models with your own data, the embeddings. Then on the LLM generation, if you are happy with the performance on the retrieval part, but you are not happy on the way how it's generating the content, then it will, like, you can train that part, like you can fine tune that part. Essentially, for me now, how I approach things, evaluate. I think large models and all this generative AI has given the wrong idea that you don't need to evaluate, that you don't need data anymore. And for me, whenever I start an application or a use case, where I spend most of the time at the beginning is creating a good evaluation. And not only with generative AI, it's not only about evaluating the use case that you want itself, but it's also about evaluating other things that are important for you, like guardrails, safety, etc. So, like, thinking about how to create this evaluation. And this is like, you cannot improve what you cannot iterate what you cannot evaluate. You cannot improve what you cannot evaluate, right? So even on RAG, when you have these two parts, you have first evaluate separately to see what is your error, and then combine, like, and then, make the necessary optimizations that it will require. So yeah, I think for me, that's more about the retrieval. And about the question that you asked me was about how we think about open source models versus Gemini and so on. As I mentioned, I think we need to meet people where they are at. And there are many companies that they cannot use Gemini models, that they prefer a very small model. For instance, let's think about Llama 3 8 billion, that they have only one task specific, small large language models, that they can fine tune it and make it, like, work it. They have, what is the difference is the company has engineering resources. Do they want to spend on engineering to make this work? Or do they want to spend that money on having something that is working fairly well or very well for the use case with a larger model, more out of the box, and so on. So yeah.
Nice, thank you. Maybe Lennard, one follow-up question about the RAG systems. How do you see the future viability of the system in the light of increasing context windows of language models? Do you see it changing at all? Because, like, in newer models, I think in Llama model, you have a huge context window. You could basically paste multiple books in there. Does that change the future of that a bit, or not so much because the use case is a different one?
Yeah, I think it's like an open research question. Like from my understanding, at least, I think if you look at models right now, they have very, very different context windows. So, like, I think Llama has like a very small one, at least like the smaller like versions, like the 8B or so. I think it has like 8K or so. And I think model providers just kind of optimize for different things. Gemini has like this huge context window. Like for us, because we want to stay model agnostic, we need to kind of work with the different context windows from the different providers and kind of still improve a lot on kind of the data we need to kind of serve a request well. I think over time, the context window for all models will get bigger. The question is, I think, like, at what point, like, does a bigger context window not help anymore? Like there's like this kind of issue around, if you have so much context, it's like, same with a human, kind of like, if you just like bombard someone with knowledge, chances are not super well they will recall everything very accurately. And I think we haven't yet seen how this can be solved with like very large context windows. I think for us, it, like, the larger the context window with still high accuracy, the better. But I think the 2 points here are different providers still choose to kind of focus and prioritize different things. So some focus on small models, some on larger, some on models with larger context windows, some on like smaller context windows, and so on. And I think these are like all choices made by very smart people. And we've kind of yet to see like what kind of blueprint or like best practices emerge from this.
Yeah, I can add a bit to that. So when you go on Twitter, then every day it's like, oh, RAG is dead. Oh, now fine tuning is dead. And now, oh, the context window is everything. So yeah, the new Llama has a really small context window, but there's already been fine tunes released with up to 1 million tokens context window, which is kind of insane. But yeah, as Gabriela said, their uses, it's more nuanced. It's not one or the other. I've also seen results like when you have these huge context windows, the model can't pay attention to everything in the context window in the same way. So some models, they focus more on the beginning and the end, and then you don't know what you're actually going to get. There's also the question about deployment. So what can you fit on your GPU? How do you scale this? And if you have a 1 million token context window, then your engineers are starting to ask questions about, well, is this really necessary? Now we need to add more GPUs on the server, and you also have the questions about the inference time. So it depends a lot on the use case. Do you really need to put everything into the context window, or can you live with a shorter context window combined with RAG, because that might give you better results faster depending on your specific use case. So yeah, it's very nuanced.
Yeah, I do totally agree with you. I think, like, for instance, we have Gemini 1.5 Pro, which is 1 million context window, and we are working on 10 million context windows. So what I want to say here is when first Gemini 1.5 Pro was out, and I was very skeptical because lost in the middle. Like with the models, like normally large language models only pay attention to the beginning and to the end, and you format the prompt in that way. But I've been like surprised by Gemini 1.5 that it doesn't have that issue. But I do agree that it depends on the use case. For instance, even when you do a RAG system, you have to select the chunk size of the text that you have to retrieve, and all these things. So if you choose like a lot of a big chunk and so on, then it gets like irrelevant information. And you, even with a RAG system, you need to balance how much you want to add in the text. Now, if you need a use case that need to know about everything, let's think about a code base that you don't know where to start, that you need to bring all the code base there to start to understand and navigate and so on, then most likely makes sense to use like a very big window that understands all the picture and can retrieve your specifics out of that. That makes sense. So when you need to know all the picture, it's good. But of course, you need to, I think what is missing at this moment are two things with this, how to make them more efficient in terms of latency and how to make them less expensive. So if right now it's not the case, it's more expensive and it's like high latency. So if this is solved in the future, I will see that it will unlock new use cases. Not necessarily will replace RAG, but it will unlock new types of use cases.
Great. Maybe one question I think that's most well suited for Bo, and that's in regards to how to stay nimble. And it's most well suited for you because you mentioned that you're fine-tuning models. And my question is, okay, you've just fine-tuned the model, and maybe that costs some money, costs some time, depending on kind of the size of the model. And then there's a new model coming out. How do you decide if it's worth looking into this? If we should fine tune again, if it's not worth, how do you kind of make those decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So so at Libra it's still a fairly early stage. So we're right now these days building our own like framework for evaluating and benchmarking the different models. So it's running or will be running like in an automated way, so that whenever a new model is released or there's a new interesting fine tune on Hugging Face, then we can simply just run it through our evaluation pipeline to see out of the box without any fine tuning how well does this work, both on some standardized evaluations, but also our own internal evaluation set that is built to our needs and our customers' use cases. So we are evaluating a large number of models, different variations of open models before we then decide which ones to actually fine tune.
So you also evaluate models that have previously been fine tuned and are open source?
Yeah, so we look at the base open models, but also keep a close eye on what's going on Hugging Face. Because some other people are making some interesting fine tunes, and especially
in the legal direction, or
both in the legal direction, but also in the German direction. So there was a lot of people have been asking questions about the new Lemma 3 and all the 15 trillion tokens and how well it's performing, and then you look into it and then you notice, okay, it's actually 95% English text in the data set. And there's not much German, and if you try to apply this for some German language use case, it's actually performing quite bad out of the box. and yet similar for other models, if you don't have much German language in the corpus it was trained on. And yeah, so we're focusing on the German speaking market, German legal applications. So it's important for us to find models that have, some basic understanding of the German language, and also be able to answer some legal questions.
And you are processing some very proprietary and interesting data, and with that training and fine-tuning your own model. Would you see any value in maybe open sourcing a part of that proprietary model yourself at some point for, I don't know, marketing or like developer access, talent access, any kind of these purposes?
Yeah, so I really like open source, but like from a compliance perspective, I think that's pretty much impossible for us to share any like trained models based on the data we're working with. But would be happy to contribute to the open source community, because we are relying on other people's contributions.
I have a follow-up question, if I can. Where do you spend most of the time? Curating the data, preparing the data, maybe creating a tokenizer that understands better the nuances, or actually on training the model and changing the architecture, or like doing what is like, I think what would make more sense? I mean, because if you say like there are new large language models, how I think is the most difficult part is curate the data. Once you have the data, well, maybe the most expensive is pre-training and so on. But if you have curated the data, then you can start running a lot of tuning.
Yeah, so as you said before, like the most important thing is the evaluation set. Before you can start to do any training or fine tuning, whatever, you need to have a good test, or a good training set, and a good set for evaluation. And this is like our main challenge, to get this data from people in this industry and create a good evaluation set before we can actually train. So that's like the main challenge for us, where we spend the most time and effort, because the tuning, the evaluation itself is kind of cheap. You can automate this, just do like some for loops and some sweeps if you're lazy, and that's fine. But getting the data is the real challenge. Yeah.
So at the end, I mean, for me, the bottom line of all of this is, at the end, the data is still your biggest asset. It's not the LLM, but it's well, I mean, for us, like maybe for other big companies, is it? But yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. Let me use you guys as kind of a diligence expert call for me, and that is because we get a lot of deal flow for kind of third-party tools to help evaluate performance of LLMs, help with explainability, and do all kinds of other services. And we've until now been quite hesitant to look deeper into the space, because I don't think it's so clear who will down the line offer that service, if it's the language model itself, if it's kind of the hosting service, or maybe the company itself. How do you look into leveraging those third-party tools? What are there, for what purposes? And do you think those are good businesses to invest in?
Yeah, so when Laurens says that he gets a large deal flow, then it means I get a lot of questions from Laurens, like, is this legit? Yeah. So yeah, looked at many of these tools. So we have a challenge in all this data protection requirements. So many of these tools we can't really use, like to doing traces and so on, because we can't have some third party logging all the inputs and outputs. So that's one main challenge for us. Another challenge is many of these tools we've looked into, they only support like the APIs, and there's really lacking support of running your own models in combination with these tools. That being said, it's important to have these tools like for transparency and for evaluation, and especially when you start to get to some more automated systems. So we're also exploring the agent topic, and there like transparency becomes even more important, because you need to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes, and why did you recommend some action to the lawyer here. So it's a really important field. There are lots of startups building here. It's unclear to me like what approach or which company is going to win this. So yeah, I agree with you. It's kind of difficult to evaluate the evaluators, but yeah.
I mean, especially for you in the legal context, explainability is quite important, right? Down the line, when you try to autonomously have claims be litigated by your tool, I think it will be quite crucial, right? So is there also like some projects you do internally to figure this out when you think about fine-tuning models?
Yeah, so far we've been working with some open source frameworks that you can just run yourself locally, where you're not relying on a third party and to use their service. So this is the direction we have to go. So use these open source tools, or build our own tooling.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, like I think our promise is like what we've seen last summer was like this duality of excitement around like what will be possible with LLMs, and then like the kind of fear or like hesitance around like what happens to my data. So I think that's like this kind of underlying crux. If you look at usual like SaaS and B2B SaaS, people are like chill about it. You can just like use any provider, you can kind of stack together your tooling and use it. But if you kind of work with LLMs and you work with providing companies some kind of service that uses LLMs, the first association is always data. Like, where is my data stored? Like, if you look at ChatGPT and the usage of ChatGPT by employees, it's like what IT professionals call shadow IT. Like, it's people use some kind of vendor we don't know, and we don't know what data gets in there, like how it's processed and so on. So from our perspective, and kind of doubling down on what you said, it's very important. Like, if you think about software as a supply chain, we supply a product to companies that want to leverage LLMs for employee productivity. And we need to make sure for our customers that our whole supply chain of providers that we use to provide our service are checked, are compliant, and so on. And we essentially only use as external services like very, very crucial ones, like necessary ones to run our business, which is usually cloud providers like GCP, AWS, Azure, but we're kind of cloud agnostic on that. But it's always like whenever like an infrastructure provider comes to us, and we have like hundreds of thousands of messages like a month. So it's quite some kind of throughput that we see, and we could use certain infrastructure providers. The bar these providers would need to pass for us to buy them and kind of add them to our list of suppliers that we need to kind of argue in front of our customers that we are using those services and the data gets sent there. That bar is very high. So we don't, like, we've essentially built all our tooling ourselves, and we don't really rely on any infrastructure providers on the LLM specific tasks, and that might change over time. And there's a few good projects. Like, I mean, what kind of can help solve this is just open source. I think that there's like a great team from Berlin, Langfuse, who's kind of working on tracing and making that available via open source. So that's interesting. But yeah, we essentially haven't, we don't really buy providers because we would need to kind of pass that upstream to our customers, and they don't really like seeing more logos than our logo.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, it depends on what you want to monitor. So if you want to control the input, the prompt that is coming to your system, then there is content moderation and safety filters, and then you can focus on that part. So for instance, at Google, we have a model that is available to customers that they can detect in the prompt, and it detects something that is sensible, like whatever, sexual, violent, or so on. It gives you the probabilities, and then you can decide, okay, from this prompt, there are these 3 red flags I'm not going to pass to my system. That's for this type of general content moderation. But if you want to make sure that the person doesn't ask something outside the scope of your application, then you need to build another kind of guardrail there. One thing that is very interesting, and I'm in favor from open source, is that all open source have log props. So basically, and then Palm models have it, but Gemini models don't have it because we don't want to expose this yet. The reason is like when you train a model, this is like autoregressive LLMs, right? Like what we have these days, like the coder only, that they are trained to predict the next word. And this next word comes from a pool of vocabulary that is fixed. It's like some vocabulary there. So for instance, Llama 3 has like 30 billion tokens, right? So from all of that, so log props is going to give you what is the probability of the tokens that you got, right? And I've seen a lot of people using these log props on top that to create like some sort of confidence, especially for regulated industries that they are audited. They need to provide that some sense of confidence score. And I think this is super cool from open weight models and open source models that you can easily extract the log props. You most likely will need to calibrate, but you can still extract them. Now, I think like what is important from existing toolings and so on, or if I were to have a startup or something, what I will do, for me, it's more rather to be flexible because it will be depending a lot on your use case and explainability. So if you collect enough, when you put your product into production and you collect enough information from consumers, you can even build your own model on top of that to explain what is happening behind this, because you will get more data and you can constructively, like in the meantime, at the beginning, you can use tools that are out there available, but as your product is more exposed and you get more information, it's also a good opportunity to build a separate model only to cover the explainability, especially because, as you say, you can change from large model to large model. You can change from one pre-training to another one for different instruction tuning. So again, having a system in place where you can collect this information and create your own explainability tool for your own use case, I think will be very powerful. So it's all about setting the ground from the beginning and then rise up from there.
Lennard and Bo, you both already have raised money from VCs. I'm curious about what are usually the technical questions of investors in the due diligence phase. Do they at some point really look into your tech stack, your models, or is it usually just conversations with the technical co-founder? What startups that are raising or are going to raise, what kind of piece of advice could you give them in the interaction with investors?
Like, I think first advice would be like, get into YC. That helps a lot. It sounds stupid, but like you essentially inherit so much reputation that the whole fundraising process afterwards is usually just way shorter. Like, I mean, just like speaking from a founder, like we've just announced our round like a month ago or so, but we've raised it last August, September. And like the whole process back to back took us like 1.5 weeks, I think. Like we scheduled like, I think 40 calls in like 1 week. We got offers in that week, and then we kind of decided over the week, and then we kind of signed the contracts like early week later. And like, that's not because like we're great fundraisers. It's just like YC really helps you to kind of validate at least the team that's working on this. Like it's that's been very helpful. I think in terms of the conversations we've had, I mean, obviously in that kind of short amount of time, wasn't at all technical. That's also again inherent of YC, because they kind of, if you are accepted into YC, like VCs assume that you know the tech part, and the question's more like, what's your like differentiation over time? What's your mode? That was like at least our #1 question. And I mean, we built a ChatGPT for large companies, and every VC was like, yeah, duh. That's something ChatGPT will do themselves. So the people that invested into us didn't really look at the tech. They kind of all knew us before we started, or most of them knew us before. So they kind of just trusted us in the process that we will figure it out. And we kind of have a very good technical team, the way you could assume that they know what they do. I'm like not doing any coding right now. I'm like the worst one. Like I can, but I'm very slow. But like, maybe on a more practical side, I still think it holds true that you need capacity in the team to build tech, but what you kind of need to showcase is traction and kind of build evidence that what you're working on is worth financing and can become a big company. And all the tech parts, we are continuously rebuilding our tech every few months. We are always reevaluating. I mean, the field is so fast moving. You kind of never know what happens in 3, 6, 9 months. So the only thing I think that you can kind of build up over time is like an expertise in the field that you chose to kind of go into. And I think that is a result from just velocity and like product velocity, of like learning velocity, of just like getting as many learnings as quickly as possible. That's also kind of why we chose what we built. We can just go to any company and ask them, look, is anyone here using ChatGPT that's not compliant? Let's talk about it. And now we're like the first like people that our customers come to if they evaluate other LLM use cases. And that's just something that helps us like just stay ahead and kind of stay like cutting edge all the time. So I think that's been like a long answer, but
and you mentioned as an advice, get into YC. What was the process there? What was the evaluation there? Maybe also on the technical side, was it mainly team and just like a lot of gut feel because it's at the very, very early stage?
I mean, YC is like Y Combinator from San Francisco. They've kind of funded, I think, more than 5,000 companies in the last 18 years. And are like the most kind of renowned, like most reputed early stage accelerator program there is, I think. And what YC kind of cares about is mostly the founders. Like in the recent batches, I think 50-60% of the teams that applied to YC have pivoted in the batch. We did the same. We applied with a different product than what we came out with. And so what YC is really trying to do in their process is kind of build conviction on the founding team and really think about, do we trust these people, or like, do we believe that these people can build like $1 billion company? And they essentially only look for evidence that kind of support that or kind of invalidate that. And evidence can be traction, it can be your expertise in a certain field, it can be your track record in building companies or in kind of being employed in certain fields and so on. But there's many ways to kind of prove that that you have a chance at doing that. And the process is very straightforward. So it's essentially just like an application form. You fill it out. It's 25, 30 questions or so. Very pointed questions. Like it will take you some time to kind of go through it and kind of thoroughly answer those. Not because they're hard questions, just because like you need to kind of have your mental model around how you want to build your startup clear in the moment that you write the application. And once, like I think 25,000 applications or so are handed in every half a year, where like a new batch starts, and then they select a good chunk of those to like for an interview. And that's the only and second step. It's a 10-minute call with 2 to 4 YC partners. And these partners have, I think in our call, we had 3 or 4 YC partners, and they all built, or like 2 out of 3 built $1 billion company before, and 1 built a company that also was like worth hundreds of millions. But they essentially are all company builders themselves. They kind of are founders. They just chose to kind of join YC and kind of help other founders. But it's a 10-minute question, like QA session where you get like lots of questions, like around 25, 30 questions. And you need to kind of respond very briefly, like way more briefly than I am right now, and kind of make your case around why they should bet on you. And then what happens after is like you can pivot, you can do other things, but it's mostly like a bet on the founding team.
Long answer, but great answer. So I think I'll just start with a comment on the timeline there. So for those of you not aware, like closing a round in 1.5 weeks is not normal. That's like insanely fast. So the last time I fundraised was in 2021, right at the top of the last hype cycle in the VC market. And it was kind of an easy process for us back then, but it still took like 4 months. So it can take even longer than that. I heard some other companies, it can take more than a year. So there are lots of things that play in here. So one thing is like, the vision, the founding team, the traction, but something I've learned over the years and also from seeing friends struggle in their companies is the macroeconomics. So you can have a great idea, you can have traction, but like if the overall market is going down, you might not be able to raise money. So yeah, that's something else to keep in mind. Yeah, so what you said, traction is everything. To put that into perspective, it also it depends on the stage of the company. So the earlier you are, the more it's on the vision and the founding team, which is where YC is focusing. Of course, if you have traction already from day one, that's amazing and will make it much easier for you. But as the company matures, like you really need to show traction. You need to like this is the proof that what you're doing is actually solving a valuable problem and that this company has the potential to become successful.
Yeah, and just quickly to add on that, like 1.5 weeks, yes, but like we started ideating in October 22. We've built out like 15 different ideas over the course of like 7-8 months. We've kind of tried things, nothing worked. We talked to people. Like there's a whole shit show that you don't see, like in founding a company. And it took us like a long time. And like many different ideas that we kind of cycled through and kind of tested and validated and kind of built MVPs off and talked to people and didn't get to talk to people because they weren't interested and so on. Like a long journey to kind of get to a point where there's like this like initial spark of fire that you just kind of need to kind of blow enough that it kind of like gets into like a bigger fire. But that's like finding that initial spark is very tough.
Yes. And coming back to your question about the VC questions. So what we see right now is VCs who are interested in generative AI and LLM applications, they are really skeptical about horizontal solutions. So this is what Lennard is doing, and this is not to say that what Lennard is doing is wrong, but just to say that like this market is kind of saturated, and yeah, why would you want to start from scratch and compete with Langdock in building this tool at this point in time? So many, of course, we've only talked to a limited number of investors, but they're much more interested in the narrow use cases, the vertical integration, than within different industries. I think that's like the main question. It's not so much about the actual tech stack, but it's more like what are you focusing on and what traction do you have, and don't try to solve everything in a horizontal solution.
One last addition to that. I think like also like if you talk to VCs or like investors, like talk to users instead and like really build conviction and learning from people that you would sell to. Like that's also one thing of like YC. Like essentially if you talk to a VC and they say no, just listen to the no, but don't even like read what they said, why they said no. Like it sounds harsh, but essentially like the only way to kind of build like real conviction, real traction and kind of work with users and customers is by getting to unique insights that kind of like carry you forward. I think that's something that we've had initially with like the CTOs we talked to and to the early users we've had that really kind of showed us that there's a space for our product, even though like most of the VCs didn't get it. Like most also just like said, yeah, well, like 1 week, 2 week fundraise with that product, no way. Like nobody needs this. There's not like differentiated. There's no mode in this. So like, yeah, like to kind of be on the kind of faster side, like just like go straight to your users and go straight to your customers and kind of learn from them.
Nice. I think we're coming close to the end of my questions. Want to open up to the audience in a second. Maybe one final question, and with that jumping a bit on a meta level, pun not intended, and that is about kind of the future of the architecture of LLMs. Right now, all LLMs are trained and built with a transformer architecture that is based on the paper of Google actually from 2017. Every kind of model is based on that architecture, if it's from Meta, OpenAI, etc. And Yann LeCun, who is the chief scientist of Meta, is I think quite vocal about it, that this is not the mid and long-term future of LLMs, because they need a lot of data to train. I think, yeah, the big models were basically trained on all publicly accessible text data in the internet. There's concerns about also the sustainability and energy efficiency, compute efficiency of this. And we also don't have much more data at some point. Yann LeCun was drawing the comparison that, for instance, a 3-year-old child learns with much less data to how to speak and how to understand the world, or a teenager learns in, I don't know, 15 hours of lessons how to drive a car. That's more kind of data efficient because you can leverage previous context and knowledge. How do you view the future of the architecture of LLMs? And do you think there might already have been a paper that might be the future of LLMs? That's, yeah, for all three of you, also very curious what Gabriela has to say from the Google side about that. Let's hear from Google first.
I think like what Yann LeCun mentions is also one thing that I find it very interesting from what he mentions is, well, different things, but so currently the generative models, like the large language models for text and for language and for images, how they do is like for text, it will just look at what happened in the past to predict the next token, right? So this is why autoregressive, like the current ones, the decoded ones. And then in terms of images, it's like you have an image, you remove some pixels, and you want to predict those pixels that are removed. So he proposed an architecture, and it's a meta architecture that is called joint embeddings. So the idea here is why do we have to teach the large model to fill in the missing pixels when we can understand first what is important from that image? So we give the entire picture. So if you think about an image that you want to understand how a car is placed, but then this car also has like the picture of the image also has trees and so on. That might not be relevant for the model to learn those pixels from the tree, but rather only from the car. So how we can actually make all this training more efficient instead of just giving it all there, like understand how to give the entire picture, but not removing the things that are unnecessary. So I think that's about joint embedding architecture, which is different from transformers. So the other thing is like all the large models that we have right now are only focused on language. So we've been doing a very good job on understanding the abstraction from language into large language models. Even the video, the multimodals, they are all towards how we can improve the language model. But language is only one part, right? So how we reason is like more about how we put all the things together, and not only for generating a language, but like for learning how to drive, for learning how to plan. So I think this essentially is something that the large language models that we have right now cannot do. They can plan if you give few shots, but they are not reasoning. So if we think about system 1 and system 2 in psychology, like large language models are system 1. It's intuitive what you are giving, next token, blah, blah, blah. But they don't think, okay, let me just go back, let me think, and so on. So I hope that the next architecture or the upcoming architectures have this ability, but natively go back and start to reason and start to put a plan together when there are tasks that it cannot be answered intuitively. So the third thing that I see also in terms of an architecture is how, maybe this is too futuristic, but this is in my mind for a long time. And actually it's coming from a paper I read a lot of time ago, but I haven't found follow-ups. It's about how to use large language models to do also the retrieval part internally. So kind of mixing retrieval with generation inside the large language model, not externally. So how we can make the model to understand how to rank, how to do all of this process all together within the large language model. This is something I also see. Yeah, so, and another thing, I'm not sure whether it will be part of the data that large language models are outside, but how to discern good data from bad data automatically, like, because you have a lot of data, you have a lot of information, how you can discern what to focus, like how we humans do. You see 3 things and I can discard this, I can discard that, and then this. I was thinking something about mixing GANs, adversarial networks, with LLMs, like some architecture there that we have something discerning, like only trained to understand what is human information, what is something good compared to the other one. So I've seen this is like also to mitigate more natively hallucination issues and problems, because I think like even I saw a lot of hand raised here. The problems with the models that we have now is that you always have to spend so much time to understand whether this is good, whether I should, like, does it sound too much generative? Does it sound too much, if you want to write an email, does it sound too much like ChatGPT or Gemini? So I think like also how we can make this better overall. So yeah, those are, and these are my points of view. Like it's not Google points of view, but this is how I see things going. Also like one new trend, right? The small language models, like how to actually have on device, very good models on device. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
I can go. So I don't know if this is a hot take, but I think it's all about the data, all about the input data, the quality of the data, and for your specific use case. So it sounds impressive that, oh, we have this new Llama 3, and it was trained on 15 trillion tokens, but no one tells you how good those tokens actually are. They might, yeah, most of it might be shit, you don't know. So I think like even with these current architectures and their inefficiencies and so on, I think we haven't even come close to seeing the potential of like smaller models trained on some really high quality data for some narrow set of use cases. I think those models will just be so efficient when they're running. Yeah, of course, compared to the really huge models, but they will perform much better if you really care about the data that you put into the training. So I read this blog post from an AI researcher published last year, and he said, okay, I've tried all these things, I've implemented all these different types of architectures, and like the conclusion is, no matter the architecture, if you give it the same data set and you train them for long enough, they pretty much produce the same output. So it's really all about the data. So there might be some new architecture at some point in the future that just takes us to the next level of reasoning and efficiency. But like for now, I think it's really all about the data, curating the data and evaluating.
Yeah, I largely agree with you. As I've seen, like as I've said that earlier, it's all about the data, but I'm also thinking about architectures, right? Like what is the next level? Like what will come up after transformers? Because I mean, if you have the data, the same data, and you want to train all the different architectures, still the problem that you want to solve is the same. But I'm thinking about unlocking new problems that non-large language model can do right now. But with the large language, if I were to open a startup, I will have to do on data curation, like how we can work on data, like creating synthetic data, curating data, having evaluation systems, and also how to generate more data. I mean, I think like for me, it's all about data if I were to start a startup right now. But what I think about architecture, how new architectures should come up to unlock things that LLMs cannot unlock right now.
Great. Then I would like to open the round for the audience if there are any questions. Yeah.
So it's all about data, and good data is somehow locked in like publishing houses. And I wonder, was a question to Bo, like if you had to make some partnerships with authors in order to not go to any IP breach, because LLM can, not generate text, but also quote text. And so, yeah, I have no idea how that's handled.
We source data from our customers, from our partners. So we're talking with law firms, and then we get case files directly from them. And then, we have an agreement what we can do with those and so on. I don't know if that answered. Or yeah, okay.
Hello. So Gabriela, you emphasized on data. You said this is probably where you would go if you would, have a startup. So how do you see the future of sourcing data and making sure that the data is actually correct and appropriate and, moral, ethically sound and safe in order to, train all those big models?
This is a very hard task. I don't have a concrete answer. I've seen a very good use of synthetic data. And I'm going to tell you something that I've done on a very smaller scale, not even for an entire large language model, but for my own use case I've been working on. Is like I wanted to tune my model, but I didn't have enough enough data. So what I did is first I used a large language model, a very large one, to generate synthetic data. So I just prompted the model, and then I generated synthetic data, but of course, that synthetic data, I wouldn't use as it is. So then I gave around myself, going all through, I spent 20 hours doing that, to curating the data. Then I use that data to tune a model with that data to learn how to create synthetic data. And then the second iteration, when I was involving a human in the loop, which was me, the second iteration took me 2 hours. And then again, I used this golden data set and retune a model. And then the third iteration took me 20 minutes. And then I have a system to detecting. So I will say, I will take it, for very large data sets, I think we also internally have a lot of different systems only for the data. It's not only one system, but there are many different systems in place. Like if you want to make sure that it doesn't break any IP, like how to detect for IP, that is not bringing sensitive topics, and if you want to have this. Also, I've seen techniques to do on data sets available, or that you can also create to do only safety tuning on top of your model, or instruction tuning for something. So I see this in short as an iterative process. when at the beginning, there is no other way around that having human in the loop. But then as you scale and you have this, you can iteratively automate it. But honestly, at this moment, I still see that we need to bridge both things, humans and AI, and just like to make sure it's very, very good. And at this moment, if you are not a hyperscaler, I think that it's not that difficult to do. If you have a specific use case and you want to curate and you want to be very sure, yeah, I think that is very, very doable.
Okay, sorry, just one follow-up question on that. And how do you see the role of data marketplaces where companies or individuals can go there, offer correct data, maybe for free or maybe for money, and then that data can be used to train those large language models?
So yeah, again, this is my personal opinion, not Google. But if I were to start, I think like when I analyze the most successful startups or the startups that are usually bought by big companies for a lot of money are those startups that can generate a lot of data and a lot of good quality data. Of course, like you decide if you want to give it for the community, but you can also make a lot of money. So I always think investing in data is well, as of now, especially with all of the things that are happening, I think it's a good idea. And I will say, if I were to, but I'm not going to, I will definitely work on the data space and data tooling and data for curating data and also curated data sets and generate new data if you can.
Thank you all for sharing firstly. Yeah, let me word this correctly. I'm very interested in understanding if all three of you have any tips for other founders who might still be struggling to actually ensure access or get access to GPUs currently within Europe outside of the Azure, cloud space. Is there any tips that you could give us for now on how to navigate this problem? Thank you.
So we are hosting on the Open Telecom Cloud, which is located in Germany. You can sign up on the website directly and get like 250 euro vouchers. So you can start building. And they also have a startup program called Tech Boost, which we applied to. So just a word of advice, getting credits from telecom is not as easy as Google or Amazon or Azure, but it's definitely possible. Yeah, so that's what we are relying on right now. So they have GPU servers, they have like the smaller T4, T5, and they have A100s as well.
Maybe also one tip from my side. There's some academic institutions like ETH, for instance, that have quite large compute centers. I think ETH did a partnership with NVIDIA and is now among the top 20 institutions in terms of size of compute. And sometimes when you are involved with people on the advisory side that have a tenure at those institutions, and maybe something that you work on is relevant on the academic side for researchers, then it's also possible to get access there.
Hey, quick question. I think it's mainly towards Lennard. We're doing data-driven, like AI-driven data analytics. So when you see new models come up, like let's say Llama 3, do you have like a framework? Because we have built a framework to evaluate and measure, okay, in which categories, how good are these models? And then the second part of the question is, how do you talk to your customers about the adoption of potential new models? Because I think you have like a plug and play version of that. I mean, in the end, they're probably going with GPT-4 Turbo, but curious to hear what your experiences are. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, like our use case is quite horizontal, and it's more like getting like employees to use LLMs as a chatbot, as a custom GPT assistant for workflows and these sort of things. So, and when we put companies in control over choosing which models they want to use, and we haven't put much emphasis on essentially evaluating models on ourselves. Like that's something that we see, like there's lots of different benchmarks out there. We haven't built that into our process yet because it's not core to kind of what we do as a value proposition right now. So that's something that we haven't looked at in more detail.
Yeah, perhaps a question for Libra. You have access to proprietary data, as I understand from your customers. So how are you handling this? You yourself being a law firm, how are you handling this compliance, regulatory, and security perspective? Are you providing any data security? Because are you training locally, or are you training on like the servers where you fetch the models from? How it's being reflected with this EU AI Act? And secondly, if EU AI Act certification costs about 1 million euros, how would you tackle it as the final stage?
Yeah, so we're currently doing everything on the cloud, but like on the telecom cloud, which is in Germany. And so in addition to like being hosted within Europe on like an EU-owned host, there are also these certifications. So we're right now in the progress of getting the ISO 27001 certification, which will prove to our customers that we are handling all the data in a proper manner. And then Lennard is laughing because he knows what this process is like. They got the certification already. Yeah, so that's an ongoing process for us right now.
How much time does it take to have the certification, or is this the only certification required if you're dealing with proprietary data?
So I think it depends on the industry you're tackling. So within EU, the ISO 27 is the main one. If you want to work with US enterprise customers, it's the SOC type 1, 2, and if you have all of them, then of course it looks better. But
so have you applied for this EU AI Act certification? Because it must be relevant for the other startups who want to be AI startups. So what if it's very expensive? What if you can't raise money to give 1 million euros or something like that?
Yeah, we haven't looked into that specific certification yet.
I mean, it's very new, right? Like it will like take into effect, I think 1.5 to 2 years. It's just like still like it sounds harder than it is. Like from our perspective, like, I mean, we also just build a system, but essentially what the EU AI draft does in a nutshell is it classifies use cases into different risk categories. So depending on like, and this is mainly either towards more like ethically concerning decisions around like pre-filtering employment candidates, or towards use cases that are kind of getting more automated, but they kind of correlate. So I think for us right now, from the use cases that we see, we are not even in a category of risk where we would need to comply. And I'm not aware of like what you've mentioned with the 1 million or like cost certifications and so on. So I think for now,
I think it was the director of TUV, this German organization. So it's coming from him. The price is about like roughly I speak about, but the guy said that the startup should think about it, and they'll go bankrupt otherwise. Yeah, because they're going to make it very expensive. That's what.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if it's managing director of TÜV, there's some interest.
Yeah.
The way we see it is like if you are a very large organization, like first of all, we don't see as many like Gen AI use cases like that are in production that would even qualify for that for now. And I think there's like a bunch more coming, and there's a few out there. And I think it's mostly right now a concern for very large companies that have dozens or hundreds of use cases that they need to assess in terms of risk. And I think the interesting part about the EU AI Act is that it's not about an authority that needs to kind of prove that you did something wrong, but that you need to essentially document your decision making and kind of log what you've done. And setting up the infrastructure will take some time. There will be solutions for that, but it's something that I don't see many startups engaging with right now, because even engaging with a lawyer on that right now, there's so little experience and so little data on like how this will be implemented, who will kind of give the norms, how the standardization will look like, who are even the authorities sometimes. They kind of care about this and will kind of take the ownership of this. This is all still to be done. And I think that's something as a startup, you kind of always kind of fight to survive. And this is on the priority list, like not on our top 3 right now. So that might change soon.
So you don't feel paranoid at the moment, okay? About the GDPR, so are you certified? Your startup is GDPR?
Yeah, we have ISO, we have SOC 2 Type 2, we are GDPR compliant, which is like not an audit, it's just kind of required by law. So we've got like all the kind of DPA. We spend lots of money on lawyers, like I guess yeah, it's our second highest cost position next to.
Can you roughly mention the price?
Like lawyers?
The whole compliance certificate.
ISO, it depends on what you get. Like ISO, SOC 2 Type 2, GDPR. Like we use Vanta. There's like Drata, Vanta. They're all the same. They all charge horrendous prices, but they all are able to negotiate down quite a bit. So we've paid like as a whole package for like ISO audit, ISO software, SOC 2 Type 2 audit, SOC 2 Type 2 software, and GDPR software about 20K. 10K audit, 10K software. And the software is recurring because you need to get audited every now and then. It's kind of like the issue is if you have customers that are ISO compliant and they have been audited, they need you to be ISO compliant and ISO audited. So it's kind of like a big scheme, but you need to play along.
Thank you.
Maybe to quickly chime in on that. I think as Lennard said, I think there's a limited amount of companies that really fall into those high risk areas under the AI Act that need that kind of compliance standard. Then I also think there's a lot of redundancy with all the certificates that were just mentioned, ISO, SOC, GDPR. So sometimes they cover also a big chunk of what you need to have. And ultimately it's based on what your customer wants you to have and not what the law says, because Germany or the EU cannot audit 100,000 early stage AI startups. It's dependent on what your customers want you to have in order to contract with them. And that depends on what kind of customers do you have. Do you have SMEs? Do you have enterprises? Are they in UK, Germany, US? So wouldn't just straight go into doing AI Act certifications without kind of having the proper considerations about, okay, how do I spend my money and what's...
I don't know the current policies that are there or what they want to implement in the future. So if they enforce it, then we are bankrupt. So, so like if it's, you have to have AI Act certified, then we don't know that scenario.
I think
I actually have two questions. One for Gabriela. Currently, Google AI Studio is not available in the EU. Do you have any idea if this is about to change, or you don't know?
I don't know. I work more on the cloud side, so I can talk more about the Merantix AI Studio. But yeah, Google Cloud AI Studio thing is more meant for they call it like hobbies, so people like is interested. But if you want to build up company on top of that, I think you need to go into a more enterprise-ready part. So what is cool, what I really like from Google AI Studio is like that event tuning is for free. So that's super interesting. So at least even if you want to, test on anonymized data, not for production or anything, you can already give it a shot on the free version without paying, and then understand the performance improvements. But I don't have knowledge on AI Studio.
Okay, thank you. Can I do a second one for Bo? So you mentioned you train, let's say, different models for different customers so that there's no, say, data contamination between different customers. I guess this is a requirement for you. So this also means you might have to, and I'm making assumptions here, that you might have to have multiple models running at the same time for different clients. Does this present you with like any like scalability challenges, or, you know, can this, say, become a problem as you grow?
Yes. Yeah, so there's, of course, this is a challenge if you work with open models, and I'm a big proponent of small models that are fine-tuned for very specific use cases. So as Gabriela said earlier, like LoRa is underrated, like these fine-tuning methods. And so when you do this fine-tuning, then you're not actually changing the whole model. It's like a few of the layers in the neural network that you are modifying with your data set for this specific use case. And so these modifications are called adapters. And so there are ways for hosting this in a very efficient way. So let's say you want to host 5 different models for 5 different use cases on the same GPU. That can be difficult, or you might need a really big server. But there is a method so that you can take the base model, store that in memory, and then if you want to change between the use case, the only thing you need to exchange are the adapters. And then we are talking like they maybe take up like megabytes instead of gigabytes. There's one method called S-LoRa, and I've seen implementations where maybe you get a second of latency in doing this switch, but then depending on your use case, that latency doesn't matter. So we're, for instance, we're not building like this chat interface. We're trying to automate as much of the workflow as possible. And so if you don't need this like time to first token and see the text streaming, you just need to understand exactly what was happening in this contract. And so if you have this extra latency on the backend, like you're switching out some adapters to change the model for this particular use case, then it doesn't matter. The user doesn't even notice. So that's one way of dealing with it. Yes, right.
No, I want to add something because it's very important. I think like there are full fine tuning where you can change all the weights, and there is LoRa tuning that you mentioned, or parameter efficient fine tuning. What is interesting is there is been some research that shows, because LoRa tuning has different ranks, and you decide how many weights of the model you want to do. Normally you can start with rank 1, that will be very efficient for even serving or doing adapter layers. What I found and what other research have found is like if you increase the LoRa rank, let's say to 4 or more, like depending on your use case, it can approximate a lot in the performance to fully fine tuning. For the server side, you will have to do something more, but still you can like simulate almost the same performance and fully fine tuning as you increase the LoRa rank. One important thing to mention there, well, maybe one tip. There is an open source framework to do weight management and for adapter layers that is called Lorax. It's on GitHub. So you gotta check it out. I mean, you are using it already. Lorax, Predibase, no? Okay, well, check it out.
All right, nice. I think we are running out of time. I want to say thank you to all the panelists and all the people that showed up today. Quick preview. At the end of May, we will have another breakfast around tech bio with some very exciting entrepreneurs that have built quite exciting AI drug discovery companies. One of the few multi-million-dollar exits in Europe in the space. I don't know if we have announced that yet. I think we'll come around with that this week or next week. So that will be very exciting. Feel free to stick around for a couple more minutes to mingle. Yeah, thank you very much.